Hello beautiful friends and welcome to my video. My name is Kathleen and on this side of the internet I love to talk about all things bookish, and this video is no different because today I am going to be getting into all the books that I read in February and letting you know a little bit about what I felt about them, my ratings and all that good stuff. We're just gonna be yapping about the books. So let's dive into it. So for February, I read a grand total of 12 books. My goal was 14 and I fell a little shy of that goal just because it was a crazy chaotic month. I had a lot of library holes coming through and it just shifted and altered my TBR, and it was a crazy chaotic time. But that's okay because I still had fun. I still had a lot of good reads. I still got some 5 stars. So overall, it was a stupendous reading month. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about my stats and see exactly like how many 5-star books I read, how many pages I read, and get a little bit more into like the superlatives that I experienced this month, I would highly encourage you to check out my blog post, which I will have linked in the bio, or not in the bio. This is not Instagram, this is YouTube. I will have that in the description box for you to go read all that and to kind of dig into my stats. But today we're just going to talk strictly about the books, yap a little bit about like what I felt about them, what I liked, give a little bit of review, and I'm going to try to be as brief as possible and not spend hours and hours talking about books because who has time for that? So first up, we're going to talk about the first book of the month that I completed, which was Homeseeking by Carissa Chen. So I'm going to be referring to my book review actually, but for this synopsis, it's an epic story of love, family, and resilience during great political unrest. We follow Hawaii and Suchi as they weave in and out of each other's lives while facing the repercussions of war and its impact on their lives. And this was such an emotional story that just explored the Chinese diaspora, and I just really enjoyed it. It was poignant. It's sometimes just dark and heavy, but at the same time, just beautiful, filled with hope and love and optimism. And I really enjoyed it. I bawled my eyes out because it touched my heart so intimately and so purely. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. I gave this 5 fabulous stars, and I'm looking forward to reading more from Carissa Chen because I know this was her debut novel, and it was stupendous. And it was an amazing way to kick off the February reading month. Next up, we have Give Her Credit by Grace L. Williams, which is a true story of how a group of women disgruntled by their lack of financial rights joined together to open the first women's bank in Denver, Colorado. And I very much enjoyed the story. It was very enlightening, kind of understanding more of the history of how women began to become major players in the finance arena, as well as they start to get financial autonomy and gain rights when it came to ownership over their money and what they made. Very interesting, very, very intriguing, and I really did enjoy it. There were some aspects in that I really wish we could have like expanded upon further, as I did mention that in this bank in Colorado, they did strive to kind of include the marginalized communities, include Black people as well, as that was part of their ethos. But we didn't get to really dig into that and learn more about these Black voices and their impact on these communities, and the impact of, I think, they had one member of the women's group that helped to launch this bank who was a Black woman. We didn't get a lot about like her. We got a little bit of backstory about her, but we didn't really dig into her and dig into just the impact of this bank on the marginalized and Black communities. And I would have liked to have seen that a little bit more and explored that a little bit more. But aside from that, this book was still a very good book, and it's very important, and I feel like it's something that is I don't want to say it's necessary, but it's just something that you should look into and read and learn more about. I gave it 4.5 stars and I really did enjoy it. Next up, I read The Wives by Simone Gorindo, and this was a memoir. And in this story, we are following Simone. And the summary for this was, Simone, an Army wife, details the struggles she experienced when her husband Andrew enlisted to the Army, how the relationship changed, and her dependence on the other Army wives helped her manage. And I really enjoyed this book. I came at it feeling like I wasn't going to really enjoy it because I have myself kind of mixed feelings when it comes to military and Army and all those things. So I was getting outside my comfort zone and reading this, but I really did enjoy her kind of retelling her experience with this, her experience with being an Army wife and all that she went through, how it was kind of like a lonely and isolating experience. And I think the biggest thing that I took from this was kind of like this idea that when people usually talk about like Army wives or military wives, we kind of come at it with this, well, you know what you were getting into when you married this person. You knew what this life was going to be like. And I think it kind of challenged that perspective of that for me, because do we really know what we're getting ourselves into when we agree to certain things or certain situations, especially as it pertains to relationships and marriage and love? I don't think that we really do know or can understand the full scope of the actions or the things that will kind of become when we say yes to something. We're incapable of knowing the future. So I think that that kind of is a very dismissive and a very invalidating thing to say when talking to a person who is an Army wife and she's explaining kind of her struggles and how isolating and lonely it can be to be in a relationship or a partnership like that. So I guess it gave me a better understanding of that and the complexities surrounding that, and a greater respect for people that do make that choice to be with these people, to marry these people, and to kind of bridge their life with them. So it was very educational and I really enjoyed it. So I do believe I gave it 4 stars. Yes, I gave it 4 stars. Next up, we have Private Rights by Julia Armfeld, which was a speculative fiction. And this, we find estranged siblings, Isla, Irene, and Agnes, are forced to reunite following their father's passing, as they grapple with their grief, childhood trauma, and their fractured relationship amidst a dying world where secret rituals threaten their lives. This was a very weird book, but I loved that it was weird. I like a little bit of weird books, especially with speculative fiction, and this was no different. I did feel that this was a very kind of slower paced book, and it was, I don't want to say dense, but it was a lot to kind of take in. The writing style was a lot to take in, as there wasn't a lot of things happening to propel the plot forward, and it wasn't primarily plot focused anyway. It was more of a character driven story. And I think that it was, to me, a little dense and kind of like hard to kind of immerse and get into, because there was so much kind of like introspection and self-reflection and just kind of diving into this dynamic between the siblings, that it was a lot. It was a lot going on in that. And then there was a lot going on when you had the elements of the climate change, the weather, the global warming kind of aspects to this story. That was also kind of a lot to wrap the brain around and to comprehend, and how these two things impacted each other. So it was a bit of like, it was a bit for me to kind of get into it because of that. But regardless, it was still, to me, well written. The prose was elegant. It was beautiful. I really enjoyed it. The ending was interesting. It was very interesting, and I kind of did feel like, I don't want to say it came out of nowhere, but I don't know. It was different. But I still enjoyed this story nonetheless. Despite kind of this weird left field kind of ending and kind of left everything up in the air for me. But I also felt that it was appropriate for the story, kind of made sense for the story. But anyways, I gave it 4 stars. It was a good time. It was a good book. I enjoyed it. And yeah, that's that. Next up, we have The Way by Carrie Groner, which is a sci-fi. So this, we follow Will, who is on a mission to deliver a possible antidote to the virus that wrecked the world 10 years ago. Now it's him, 2 mules, a sassy cat, crafty bird, and sarcastic teen traveling through the dangers of a post-apocalyptic America with an assassin on their tail. And I really found this story to be another it was a post-apocalyptic dystopian kind of story, but there is a lot of literary leanings in this, literary feel to this, which I really enjoyed that. I did enjoy kind of the literary aspects and the dystopian and sci-fi aspects and elements of the story as well. But again, since it was kind of more of a character-driven exploration, the pacing was very slow and meandering at a lot of points, because again, I felt like they were putting more emphasis and more focus on the character-driven elements as opposed to the plot-driven elements. And we spent a greater deal on the character-driven elements. And then towards the tail end, we realized, oh, we need to kind of like resolve the issues with the plot. We need to kind of like resolve that key aspect of it. And then we picked that back up. And I don't know, it kind of felt disjointed. But the elements that I did enjoy were, of course, the more character-driven elements, the more introspective that Will had. He was very reflective, very philosophical on his kind of approach to this new world, this new environment, and how we interacted with people, and how he pretty much stuck to his ethos. He stuck to his humanity, and he didn't let the dire straits of the world impact him or change who he was at his core. I also like the kind of community elements of this. As he was traveling, we saw these different communities and how they were being they were using their brains, and they were finding and coming up with new ways to kind of like survive and to foster and create community and to work together. And I found that to be a very cool element to the story. It didn't make it feel as bleak and as dark as it could have been, considering it was post-apocalyptic and a dystopian kind of tale. But still, I found those elements to be quite, I don't know, giving it a hopeful kind of feel. So yeah, I did enjoy this story. I didn't like the disjointed feeling that I got from it, and kind of like how things went with kind of the core element with the assassin and how that was handled. So I did give this a 3.5. It wasn't all the way up there for me, but it wasn't not an enjoyable read. I did really enjoy it and had a good time with it. Next up was Master of Me by Keke Palmer. So this is a memoir, and we have entertainer extraordinaire Keke Palmer as she dispenses sage wisdom and timely truths in her memoir, as she empowers you to take control of your narrative and live a life of intention and purpose. I love this. It was chef's kiss. It was perfection. I loved how immediately it felt like I was having this kind of sit down talk with her, like over a cup of coffee. We were just 2 girlfriends chatting it up, talking about life, dispensing our wisdom to each other, and just talking about things. And that's how this book felt. It was very conversational. She was able to relay specific events and kind of like go over how she came to be to where she is now, and dispense wisdom along with that, and telling like, and giving you this idea of like, this is what I could have done better, or this is why I did these things. This is what you can take from that. So it was not just a memoir. There was a little bit of, I felt like, the self-help vibe with it as well, where she was kind of like teaching you from her life experience and telling you how you can like live your life better or do things better, or kind of reinvent yourself or pursue your passions, or whatever the case may be. And I found this to be very inspiring, very motivating, very empowering, and it was just such an amazing read. I gave it 5 fabulous stars. This was also an immersive read, a tandem read. I did read the autobiography with the audiobook, and that was chef's kiss. It was an amazing experience being able to hear her, you know, hear her while also reading the words. I don't know. It was awesome. It was an amazing experience, and I give it 5 fabulous stars. Next up, we have All the Water in the World by Erin Coffell, and this was such an emotional book. This was another speculative fiction, and it dealt with a lot of themes coming with climate change, ecological like collapse, with grief and loss, with found family, with community, and it was amazing. So we follow a young girl, her family, and a small band of survivors that live on the roof of New York's Museum of History after the glaciers melt, causing flooding and ecological collapse, and are forced to flee following a superstorm, journeying into a post-apocalyptic society. And I think my favorite, I don't know, is it my favorite? One of my favorite themes of this book was the grief and loss, and how she really expanded upon this idea of the inevitability of grief and loss, that we're all going to experience it. No one is exempt. And to think that we're not going to have these emotions and these reactions to situations, to the loss of loved ones, was so powerful to me. And she explained this and explored this in such a beautiful and poignant way. It was so very touching, and I really enjoyed that. I also liked, again, the community aspects, the found family aspects. Now, in this speculative fiction, as opposed to Private Rights and even The Way, this was a lot more dark and bleak, and we really did see kind of the depth of the human condition when it came to survival and the different ways that people react. How some people can, of course, want to go and build community and uplift people and try to make things better so that everyone can win. And how, of course, others, they're just like evil. They're just reacting out of fear and scarcity, and how their intention is to destroy or to kind of withhold and only think of themselves and a few select people so they can maintain control over the situation. And it was a very interesting exploration when it comes to the terms of that, and also when it comes to the terms of found family and connecting with other people and creating a community of people that support each other and that want to grow and that want to kind of like build and think towards moving to a better future. And I don't know, this book was amazing. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 fabulous stars. It is also my book of the month because it just struck me. I was bawling multiple times in the story, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it if you like and enjoy speculative fiction and kind of post-apocalyptic stories. This had it all, and I loved it. Next up, we have me starting a fantasy series, as I am constantly doing. As y'all, if you don't know me, let me introduce me. Hi, I like to start multiple fantasy series at one time because I'm chaos. I am a chaotic reader. I am that person. And so I started the Gilded Ones, which is part of book number 1 in the Deathless trilogy, and by Namina Forna, and I loved this book. This was also a tandem read that I read alongside with an audiobook, because with fantasy, sometimes you just gotta read an audiobook with your fantasy because these names, you need help. And I'm so glad that I did, because these names, I wouldn't have known how to pronounce them for the life of me. But it was an amazing experience. Really, really enjoyed it. So in this story, we are following Decca, who is a 16-year-old girl that is anxious about the kind of blood ceremony that she has to kind of embark on, due to the fact that she is fearful that she is going to be found out that she is unclean, because she feels like, or not, is it unclean? I'm sorry, it's impure, and that she's going to be branded a demon. And lo and behold, the ceremony comes to pass, events happen, and she is deemed to be impure and deemed to be a demon. And that's when the death mandate falls upon her, where she has to be executed. And as she is kind of struggling and coming to grips with this, and coming to grips with like the betrayal of her community, a mysterious woman finds her and gives her the opportunity of a lifetime to escape this and to go instead to serve the emperor and to join his band of elite warriors known as the Alaki, where they are trained to fight and defeat the Death Shrieks who plague this community, plague this land, and they're going to basically eradicate them and put a stop to their kind of tyranny. And she agrees, because what other options or choices does she have? And upon embarking on this adventure, she learns so much about herself. She steps into her authentic power. She learns so much about who she truly is, her history, her legacy, and it changes her life forever. This was an amazing story as we are following this kind of messed up patriarchal society that is just hell-bent on oppressing women and just holding them captive by these ridiculous kind of archaic standards. And how even with Decca, we see how she has been indoctrinated and brainwashed into believing all of that is taught, and where religion is kind of used to oppress these women and hold them down. And we have so many interesting themes regarding that, and surrounding misogyny and sexism, and even kind of bigotry and prejudice. We have all of that in this book. I really enjoyed it. I am anxious to read the second installment of this series. I gave this 5 fabulous stars, and yeah, it was amazing. Next up, I read The Bog Wife by, what was the name of it? I read The Bog Wife by Kate Cronister, and this was a book. This was a book. And to be honest, I haven't even fully fleshed out my feelings towards this book. I haven't even come up to a rating. I think it's somewhere between a 3.5 to a 4. And basically in this story, we are following these siblings who are coming together, and they are gathering to lay to rest their patriarch in hopes that afterwards the eldest son will then be gifted a bog wife from the bog, and they will then continue on building their kind of family legacy and continuing on with their line. And basically that doesn't happen. Things fall apart at the seams. The eldest son does not get the bog wife, and due to kind of the loss of their father and his wisdom and his guidance, they're all scrambling to figure out what to do. We have the eldest son, Charlie, who is uncovering truths about their history, about their lineage. We have the other daughter, I think it's Ida, who is basically going to go make her own legacy, her own way, and do her own thing in order to maintain the family line and continue to keep growing. We have the other son, Percy, who is still trying to hold fast and hold true to this kind of legacy of receiving and having the bog wife and continuing the family legacy, continuing their lineage and their line. We have the other daughter, or the other sister, who, what is her name again? I do believe it's Nora. I'm sorry, it's Nora. How she is just wanting to cling to her family, cling to this place. She wants everyone to kind of come together and give her all the attention, so she's dealing with her own stuff. And we have Winna, who had left home but came back for the ceremony, who is basically trying to gather together her siblings and say, you can still get out, you can still get away from this house, you can go into the world outside and really live your lives and pursue your passions and dreams and be productive people of society. And it's a hot mess. It is a hot, sticky mess, but it is kind of interesting to see each of their stories, each of how they are kind of navigating this life with how everything has happened and why they are the way that they are, what made them this way, and kind of what happens afterwards and how they move forwards to kind of claim a better future for themselves. And it was a very interesting story. I will give it that. I was scratching my head because it was odd, but yeah. So this is somewhere between a 3.5 to a 5. I don't know what it is just yet. I still need to think on this book, but it's somewhere between 3.5 and a 4, not a 5. But yeah, I'll have to update you on where this kind of lands. Next up, we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is my first Emily Henry book, and I was super excited about diving into her works. And I am so glad that I did, because I read this for Valentine's Day, and it was such an adorable and cute flipping story. So in this story, we are following Daphne, who on her fiance's, I think it's bachelorette, on her fiance's bachelor party, he ends up hooking up with his best girlfriend. What was her name? Petra. He ends up hooking up with Petra, and he comes home and he tells her, well, I'm not sure about us anymore. I hooked up with Petra and we had these feelings for each other and we're going to explore them. You have a week to get out of my house. Pretty much. So sad, so sorry. And she's just like, what the? And Miles, the Petra's boyfriend, comes over trying to figure out and untangle what the heck is going on, why she just left him a Dear John letter. And she's like, yeah, well, she hooked up with my fiance. They're going off on a vacation somewhere. Can I stay with you? Because I got nowhere to go. So they end up becoming roommates and staying together. And as they're kind of recovering from this shock, from this betrayal of their then spouses, they build a friendship, they build a connection, they grow close together. And of course, as always, because of that forced proximity, a little romance blossoms and blooms. And this was such a very emotional and thoughtful romance. It is not like the typical romance. It's not a typical contemporary romance that I have read, and I really did enjoy it. It was such a more emotional and thoughtful aspect to this story, to this element, and I really, really enjoyed that. Fiance was on that bullshit, and you know, Petra was on that bullshit too, but it was good. It was good. I enjoyed it and I gave it 5 fabulous stars. Next up, I read A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. So for this story, we see James as she returns to her hometown following the sudden death of her twin brother and is forced to face the past she ran from while digging into the truth about her brother's death and whether it was accidental or not. So this is my second book by Adrienne Young, and I will say that her writing is exquisite. It is beautiful. Her prose is, it's something to behold. And the way that she can craft and create an atmosphere. She is such an atmospheric writer. It just, she just has a way of writing this story to where you are just pulled in and you can feel, taste, smell everything. I love that about her, that her books are a feast because you can behold them with all of your senses. And I really enjoy that. However, I have to say that when it comes for the story, when it comes for moving the plot forward, when it comes to those things, that's where I feel like that strength gets in the way, because the story is okay. But again, I think that it's very drawn out. It meanders. She takes a while to kind of get to the point, and I find myself getting a little bored because it's taking her a little while to kind of get to the point and establish everything. Because of all that beautiful atmosphere, all that beautiful prose, she can't balance out between that and like driving the plot and the story forward. And you know, also, again, I find like this is something that I find to be an issue with a lot of books that are a mix of like plot driven and character driven, where you can see the struggle between them, like focusing on the plot and focusing on the character. And I just sometimes wish you would just make it purely character driven and then just expand upon that, because that seems to be the element that I enjoy the most in these books, are kind of a mix of these things as opposed to the plot. Yeah, just make it character driven, because y'all like dibbling and dabbling and going back and forth, it feels disjointed for me. And that's kind of the same thing that happened with this book. It felt disjointed as we were trying to balance the deeper elements of like James's character, kind of her coming to terms with her past, her unraveling and dealing with her grief and her guilt for a lot of different things that happened in her past, that happened between her and her brother, their lack of like a close relationship in their adulthood. And then we're trying to also unravel the mystery of how did he die? Was it an accident or wasn't it an accident? And we have the magical realism elements that also kind of represent her grief, but they also represent this fact that maybe his death wasn't, maybe he's trying to give her warnings about his death not being accidental, and he's trying to give her clues about what really happened. So it was just a lot going on. And again, it felt disjointed to me in some places, and it also felt that it kind of lagged. So I gave this a 3 stars. I had an enjoyable time. As always, I love her writing, but just something about her stories kind of feel a little bit disjointed to me. And they are not because they're slower paced, but just again, it's the disjointed part that really doesn't work for me. Next up, we had A Cool Thirst by Angela Montoya. So in this story, we are following Carolina, a fierce vampire huntress who crosses paths with Lalo, a fledgling vampire seeking vengeance on his maker. The two reluctantly join forces when they discover they share a common enemy, and sparks fly. When I say that this was such a cute, silly, goofy, funny little romance, it was adorable. In the beginning, it kind of threw me off, and I found Lalo a little bit annoying because he was a little clumsy and like a little ditzy and dumb in a little ways. Him and his sister Fernanda both. And I was like, oh God, I was getting annoyed by that. But I quickly got over it because I began to kind of see this kind of thing emerge where we see Carolina being more of the aggressive, more of the kind of efficient, more of the dominant personality, as opposed to Lalo, who was more of like the scholar, more kind of a dreamer, more in his head, and less kind of dominant. And I liked that shift because usually when we see in heterosexual kind of male-female relationships, it's always a male that is the dominant one, and that is assertive, and that is more of the kind of like aggressive one, as opposed to the female being kind of ditzy, kind of being intellectual and daydreamy, and not really got her marbles all together. And I like this kind of switch, this kind of gender reversal, and I found that it worked for the story. I really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the vampire lore. It was a little bit different than what we normally or typically see with vampires, and I liked that. I also liked that it wasn't about the humans trying to acclimate and become a vampire, and that wasn't the focus of the story. It was more of the vampires trying to find a way to become human again and trying to cling to their humanity as much as they possibly could, and that it wasn't like a romanticization of vampirism. I also like that because that is a fresh take on that whole thing. So I gave this 4 stars, or did I give it 4.5? No, I gave it 4 stars. I had a really good time, really enjoyed it. Looking forward to reading more from Miss Angela Montoya in the future. Next up, we have An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. So in this story, we follow a young married couple's future is derailed when the husband is wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit and spends 5 years in prison until he's released early to face his estranged wife and try to reclaim his marriage and life. This was such an emotional story, and I really enjoyed it. It's one of those kind of stories where it's hard to pinpoint who is right or who is wrong in the situation because it's just such a bewildering kind of circumstance to be placed in. Like with Celestial and Roy, her husband being incarcerated for a crime he didn't commit, and her basically at some point doing that saying, I can't wait for you to serve this 20-year sentence. I need to move on with my life. I need to kind of make steps to look out for me and pursue the things for me. And while there was a part of me that's like you should be loyal to your husband and you should wait for him. He was innocent. He didn't ask for this. He didn't do anything wrong. But there's also this part of me of saying like waiting 20 years for this person, and basically all through your 20s, all through your 30s, till you're about 40 something, for him to come back is a big ask. If you want to start a family, that puts you being able to start a family as a hard pause. That puts a lot of things in limbo. And like, I think that's a hard ask to expect someone to live in limbo for so long, or to build their hope on a maybe you'll get released early if we're able to appeal this. And I can understand that as well. I understand so many different elements of the story. It was really hard to pick a side to be on. And I think that is kind of the point. This is to kind of help you to kind of view love and marriage in a different light, and to, really think twice about what you think you would do or what you think people should do. And it really gave you different insights to every aspect inside of this kind of circumstance and this situation. And the writing was amazing. The writing was beautiful. I had a lovely time with this. I gave this 4.5 stars, and the only reason I docked a star is because I would have really appreciated a little bit more of Celestial's perspective. And that is because in this book, there was this one part where I think it was Andre that mentioned to Roy, as they were kind of discussing their feelings for her, that she's not your property and you don't own her. And that just kind of really highlighted to me that we really didn't get Celestial's point of view about that. We really weren't getting Celestial kind of asserting herself and being, you know, confident and saying exactly what she wanted. She kind of just bent to Andre's will, she kind of bent to Roy's will, and just kind of went with whoever kind of dominated over her. And it would have been, I would have appreciated it a lot to kind of see her kind of come into her own in this journey and kind of become as her own separate person and kind of, you know, step forth with her authentic truth and her identity intact and kind of setting the pace for that, whether that was not being with Andre or just being with herself. I would have enjoyed seeing that aspect more from Celestial in this story. So that's that. Lastly, I had one reread this month, and that was A Woman in the Window by AJ Finn. And this is still about a 4-star for me. I enjoyed the story. Yeah, it's still that girl for me. So in this story, we are following Anna, who has become an agoraphobic following like a tragic accident in her life. And she befriends this one night, she befriends her neighbor, and they kind of like have wine together. They play chess together and they become close. And she witnesses her murder as she finds that the husband or somebody, she doesn't really know who, next door stabs her to death. And as she goes to report this murder, they basically tell her that it didn't really happen. She doesn't know what she's talking about. That's not really his wife. All these things happen and come to place, causing to bring up to question her sanity and whether she's telling the truth or not. And I really enjoyed this. This is the book that made me fall in love with the trope of unreliable narrator, because I think it's done so exquisitely in this book. I really enjoyed it. I feel for this woman. She is irritating and she is a little bit causing a lot of her own situation, but I really enjoyed it the second time around as much as I did the first time around. And yeah, so those were all the books that I read in February. Like I said, it was a chaotic month. I had a lot of holes coming through, a lot of library books. I only got to like 3 books off, actually 2 books off my physical TBR and 1 reread. So it was a chaotic month, but I enjoyed every minute of it. I enjoyed much of what I was reading. I had a lot of good 5 stars. It was great. So what were your top winners for this past February when it came to your reading month? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.